Rosalba Acosta was a 42-year-old resident of Los Angeles when she was shot and killed on the evening of November 28, 2003. The killing occurred in the Hollywood area of Los Angeles in the late hours of Thanksgiving night. Acosta had spent the holiday at the home of a longtime friend, where she joined family and friends for a Thanksgiving dinner. After the meal, she and her family prepared to leave the friend's home and return to their own residence. On that night, Acosta was accompanied by her husband, her daughter, and her 2 sons. After the meal, her husband, identified in court records as Jose Acosta, backed the family's silver Ford F-150 pickup truck out of a parking space. Because her husband had been drinking earlier in the evening, he asked Rosalba to drive the vehicle for the short journey home. She agreed, and she moved into the driver's seat. The family's 20-year-old son sat in the front passenger seat, and their younger children were seated in the back of the truck. As the truck began to pull away from the curb and onto the street, gunfire erupted. Their son Louis, who was in the vehicle that night and later testified at a hearing in 2026, described hearing shots and seeing muzzle flashes from a vehicle that was directly behind them in traffic. According to his testimony, someone in the trailing vehicle leaned out of a window and fired a handgun toward the Acosta family's truck. The shots struck the family's truck, including a bullet that passed through the rear windshield and through the headrest of Rosalba's seat. The bullet struck Acosta in the head. Her son Louis yelled at her to drive, but she was already mortally wounded. The family's truck continued on under the control of Louis, who took over driving in the immediate chaos. Police officers from the Los Angeles Police Department responded to a 911 call from that block in Hollywood. When officers arrived, they found the silver F-150 stopped in the middle of Fountain Avenue with people around it, distressed and yelling. Acosta's injuries were severe, and she was pronounced dead later that night at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. At the time of the shooting, investigators from the LAPD initially worked the case as a homicide. Early witness accounts included descriptions of a dark-colored vehicle seen near the scene. Some witnesses reported seeing a 4-door car with distinctive side lighting near where the shots were fired. Detectives at the time speculated that the shooting may have been related to gang activity or a case of mistaken identity, though there was no evidence that the Acosta family had gang ties or were connected to any gang activity. Despite initial investigative leads, the case remained unsolved for many years. No arrests were made in the immediate years following Rosalba Acosta's death, and the homicide went cold. The details of the investigation were not widely publicized, and for nearly 2 decades the identity of any suspect remained unknown to the public. In February 2026, law enforcement announced a significant development in the case. Investigators from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stated they had identified a suspect in the killing nearly 19 years after the shooting. The suspect, identified as Victor Perez, was 17 years old at the time of the murder and was later tracked down by detectives based on information obtained through an informant. Because Perez was a juvenile at the time of the alleged offense, prosecutors initially filed charges in Los Angeles Juvenile Court, even though he is now 39 years old. Prosecutors have indicated they will seek to have him tried as an adult given the nature of the crime. At a juvenile court hearing, sheriff's deputies led Perez into the courtroom in shackles along with other defendants charged with serious offenses. In court filings, it was revealed that detectives had worked to locate and interview Perez after receiving information from an informant that tied him to the homicide. The details of how the informant connected Perez to the crime have not been publicly disclosed in full, but law enforcement officials stated that the new evidence was sufficient to justify charges. Perez has entered a plea of not guilty. The homicide charge relates directly to the shooting that killed Rosalba Acosta. Prosecutors allege Perez was responsible for firing the weapon that struck Acosta in the head while she was driving with her family on that November night. The case remains active, with pretrial proceedings ongoing in juvenile court due to the defendant's age at the time of the offense. The Acosta family has been involved in the proceedings, with Louis testifying about his recollection of the shooting. In his testimony, he provided a first-hand account of the moments leading up to the shots, including the sounds of muzzle flashes and the suddenness of the attack. His testimony helped establish the factual timeline of the events on that night almost 2 decades earlier. The case has drawn attention because it underscores challenges in solving cold case homicides, especially those involving shootings with limited forensic evidence. Over the years, law enforcement has re-examined evidence and followed up on leads as they developed, but until the recent arrest, the case remained without charges. In charging Perez, prosecutors noted that advances in investigative techniques and witness cooperation played a role in reviving the investigation. Detectives also credited persistence and follow-up interviews in ultimately identifying a suspect and presenting evidence to a grand jury. Because Perez was a minor at the time of the alleged offense, the procedures in juvenile court differ from those in adult court. However, prosecutors have indicated they are pursuing a transfer to adult proceedings to seek more severe penalties available in adult court for homicide. Defense attorneys for Perez have challenged aspects of the prosecution's case, including questions about the admissibility of statements and the reliability of informant testimony. The case remains significant to the Los Angeles community and to the family of Rosalba Acosta, who lost a spouse and a mother in the shooting. Family members have spoken publicly about their ongoing grief and about the impact of the unsolved case for nearly 2 decades. They have expressed hope that the legal process will reach a resolution that acknowledges the life lost and provides some measure of accountability. As of early 2026, formal trial dates have not been set, and the case continues through pretrial motions and hearings.
Prosecutors and defense attorneys are preparing for further proceedings, and the court is overseeing scheduled hearings to determine whether charges will be sustained in an adult court setting. The killing of Rosalba Acosta, which occurred more than 20 years ago, was one of many homicides in Los Angeles that initially went unresolved. The recent charges against Victor Perez mark a rare instance in which law enforcement has been able to revive a cold case and pursue a suspect years after the crime. For now, the case remains an active legal matter, with the outcome pending as the court evaluates evidence and hears arguments from both the prosecution and defense. The story of Rosalba Acosta's death, the long period without resolution, and the eventual charging of a suspect reflect the slow and often challenging path of cold case investigations in modern law enforcement.
On April 11, 2013, 26-year-old Cody Crabtree was found with multiple gunshot wounds in a parking lot in the 2500 block of Primrose Street in Beaumont, Texas. The shooting occurred in the evening at an apartment complex parking area. Emergency medical personnel and law enforcement were called to the scene after reports of a shooting. Crabtree was transported to a nearby hospital, St. Elizabeth Hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries the following day. At the time of the incident, local law enforcement, including Beaumont Police, responded to the scene and began an investigation into Crabtree's shooting. Officers secured the area, collected preliminary evidence, and interviewed initial witnesses. The circumstances of the shooting suggested that Crabtree had been shot at close range. Witnesses at the scene provided accounts of hearing gunfire, and investigators determined that Crabtree had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Despite these early investigative actions, no suspect was immediately identified, and no arrests were made in the weeks and months following the shooting. The case was classified as a homicide and entered into law enforcement databases as an active but unsolved case. Detectives continued to canvass the area for witnesses, gather any available physical evidence, and review ballistics and forensic findings, but leads were limited. As is often the case in shootings where few reliable eyewitnesses come forward and forensic evidence is minimal, progress was slow. For years, Crabtree's murder remained unresolved, with his family and the community left without answers. Homicide investigators maintained the case file, periodically reviewing evidence and following up on any new tips. Over time, the investigation went cold as leads dried up and no new information emerged that could point investigators toward a viable suspect or a chargeable offense. During the ensuing years, advancements in forensic methods and changes in witness cooperation sometimes help cold cases move forward, but in Crabtree's case, nothing publicly surfaced for many years. Law enforcement kept the case open, and the Beaumont Police Department continued to urge anyone with information to come forward. In early 2026, nearly 13 years after the shooting, investigators announced a significant development in the case. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and Beaumont detectives executed renewed investigative efforts that led to the identification of a suspect. The suspect was named 33-year-old Dimitri TJ Oliver in connection with the April 2013 shooting death of Crabtree. Oliver was arrested and booked into the Jefferson County Jail on a charge of murder. His bond was set at $1 million. According to law enforcement statements and court records, his arrest in 2026 followed a witness coming forward with information identifying Oliver as the person responsible for shooting Crabtree. The witness's account, provided many years after the original incident, described seeing Oliver approach Crabtree and shoot him multiple times before fleeing the scene. That testimony became a key piece of evidence that enabled detectives to seek an arrest warrant. Beaumont authorities stated that the information provided by the witness allowed them to submit affidavits to the court, demonstrating probable cause to arrest Oliver for the murder. The warrant was issued and law enforcement located and arrested him. Oliver's arrest represented a rare break in a long-standing cold case homicide for the Beaumont community. At the time of his arrest, court records indicate that Oliver was detained without incident. He was processed through the local jail system on a murder charge tied to the April 2013 killing of Crabtree. Bond conditions included the $1 million bond set by the judge, reflecting the severity of the charge. Prosecutors stated that the case would proceed to the criminal justice system, beginning with arraignment and pretrial proceedings. Investigators have stated that although a significant amount of time had passed since the homicide, police never closed the case file and continued to follow up on any information that came into the department related to the shooting death of Crabtree. The renewed investigation included re-interviews of witnesses, reviewing old evidence with fresh perspectives, and pursuing any tips received over the years. The decision by a witness to come forward and to provide details identifying Oliver was described by law enforcement officials as a turning point in the case. Investigators also indicated that other pieces of evidence and corroborating testimony were being evaluated in conjunction with the new witness statements to build a prosecutable case against Oliver. Authorities have not publicly disclosed the full details of the alleged motive for the shooting or what prompted the initial argument, if any, between Crabtree and the suspect. Early media reporting about the case cited that the fatal encounter may have followed an argument between Crabtree and occupants of another vehicle in the parking lot, but precise circumstances have not been fully detailed in official statements. Both vehicles reportedly fled the scene after the shooting.
In the years before the arrest, family members of Crabtree maintained that they hoped the case would one day be solved. They made periodic appeals to the public for information and supported law enforcement's efforts to keep the investigation active. Crabtree's family members have expressed relief that a suspect has been identified, though they also emphasized the long wait for answers. Law enforcement noted that families affected by cold case homicides often endure years of uncertainty, and that resolving these cases can bring a measure of closure. The arrest of Oliver in 2026 is subject to the judicial process, and as of the time of reporting, he remained in custody awaiting further court proceedings. Prosecutors will need to present evidence, including witness testimony, forensic material, and any supplementary investigative findings at subsequent hearings. The defense is expected to make legal arguments regarding the admissibility of evidence and procedural matters, as is typical in homicide prosecutions that occur many years after the original incident. Legal experts note that cold cases pursued years after the fact can present unique challenges. Witness summaries may fade, physical evidence may degrade, and locating witnesses can be difficult. Nevertheless, the criminal justice system provides mechanisms for charging and trying suspects even long after the underlying crime if probable cause can be established. Investigators have encouraged anyone with additional information related to the case to come forward and share what they know with law enforcement. Cold case units often rely on ongoing cooperation from the public to identify leads, confirm timelines, and corroborate statements. As the legal proceedings move forward, Crabtree's case remains a focal point for the Beaumont community, illustrating the persistence of law enforcement in pursuing justice for unresolved homicides. The identification and arrest of a suspect more than a decade after the crime highlight both the challenges and the enduring efforts that characterize cold case investigations. The criminal justice system will continue its work to assess the charges against Oliver, and the outcomes of pretrial proceedings, including any motions regarding evidence or witness testimony, will shape the case as it proceeds toward trial. Family members and community members await further updates on the status and progress of the prosecution. The fact that a suspect has been arrested does not equate to a conviction, and the burden of proof remains on prosecutors to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Defense counsel is expected to advocate for their client at all stages of the judicial process. The murder of Cody Crabtree in 2013 and the subsequent arrest in 2026 of a suspect in the killing shows how law enforcement agencies work to revisit and re-examine cold case homicides when new information or evidence surfaces. The path from an unresolved investigation to an arrest often involves years of meticulous work, community engagement, and the willingness of witnesses to provide testimony that can lead to accountability.